Hi, and welcome back to the Secret Life of Parkinson's. I'm Jessica Krauser, and I am joined again by Melissa Carlson. Hi. I promise you guys, Brian Baker is coming back. We just happen to, we record a lot of shows all on one day, and it happens to be the day that he's still getting his DBS clinical trial test thing done. He doesn't know what's happening, but he's not here.
He's not here again. So here I am.
Here's Melissa. And we have a special guest joining us. It's my friend from Florida, sunny Florida.
Matches her personality.
Yes, you can say hello.
Hello.
Okay, I was like, can you hear us? And you are a young-onset Parkinson's patient, just like me, and was diagnosed, I think, the same year, right? 2019?
Even close to the same month.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and we found each other, on the new day and age, social media. And our lives, our stories, seemed very similar, but there was, one difference, or at least a difference that we know of right now. And that's our topic today is we're going to talk about not genetic testing, but just the genetic issue, the genetic side of Parkinson's in general. So as of right now, I'm not aware, but I haven't had anything tested. But I'm not aware if I have any genetic, what do you call them? Genetic
markers?
Mutations,
Markers, mutations,
okay.
variances.
Yeah. But you have gone through the testing. So wanted to see if you would share and talk to us about why you got it, and we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah.
So I guess the story kind of begins with my mom. My mom came to the United States from Bolivia in her late 20s and moved here with a few cousins of hers and settled down in New York, and ended up meeting my dad in New York City and ended up getting married in, I think, 1977. I came along a year later in 78. And my sister came along in 1981. Mm-hmm. So happy little family. And a few years after my sister was born, my mom started noticing some pain in one of her arms and went around to a few different doctors. They couldn't figure out what was going on. Eventually, it led her to a neurologist in New York City. And my dad tells the story that she walked into his office and within minutes, he diagnosed her with Parkinson's disease, which I think was a blow, to them as a young family, and just
how old
kind
was
of
she?
changed. Sorry?
I'm sorry. Did you say how old she was?
No, I want to say she was around 41, 42.
And this was well before, like, the Michael J. Fox awareness aspect of it. So did they even ever hear of it at that point?
No, I don't think, either of my parents knew what Parkinson's was. And this was back in the early 80s. So they were just very unprepared for dealing with it. She went on medicine, I think, right away. Mm-hmm. I was 5 when she was diagnosed.
Okay.
So, my earliest memories are of her, with a tremor and some slowness and rigidity. But as a kid, you don't really look at it as,
But she was mom, right?
She's mom.
Yeah.
Exactly. I treated her the same as, I loved her, and when I was a teenager, I became difficult, just as difficult.
Yeah.
But we definitely had some things that were different growing up. So my grandmother, who was living in Bolivia at the time when my mom was diagnosed, she actually moved to the States to help take care of my mom.
Oh.
So I grew up with kind of bonus for me.
Yeah.
I grew up with my grandmother in my house starting at age 5. And she's the reason that I speak Spanish to this day.
Oh, nice.
Because I had
Nice.
she didn't
You
know.
had to talk to her.
I had to talk with this other adult that was all of a sudden living in my house. And okay, I guess I'm going to learn Spanish. So there were definitely some wonderful things that came out of that. So that was, my grandmother actually lived with us in the house until 2006 when my mom passed away.
Oh, wow.
So just incredible devotion to, her daughter. And my grandmother just passed away less than 2 years ago at the age of 96. So
Oh, wow. I'm so
raised
sorry.
by my mother and my grandmother, which is just an incredible testament to, the love that mothers can give.
Absolutely.
So yeah, my mom, kind of had I think, fairly slow progression, 22 years living with the disease. And eventually her body got so frail that it was pneumonia that, kind of got her at the end. But
And you said she was on medication. It was still carbidopa levodopa back then, wasn't it?
Yeah. So, I mean, I knew what Cinemet was when I was like 6 years old.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
What about like exercising? Did she know about that? Was that a thing back then?
I think there was just very preliminary evidence about exercise. I found one picture of her on an exercise bike. I think that picture may have been the one and only time she was on that exercise bike.
So it's funny what you say, like with, exercising and what things looked like back then. But I know you also shared, at least with me, some pictures of things that you did in your childhood of like traveling. And I know it was going to see family, but, talk about that. Like she had this disease and kids to deal with, but I don't think that let her stop.
No, looking back at, pictures of my childhood, I realized just how many different places we went as a family. I mean, so my mom had this obsession with Disney World. And I feel like we have at least 3 or 4 different sets of pictures from different visits to Disney World. And having grown up in, at least the first part of my life in New York, I mean, traveling down to Florida several, to go to Walt Disney World must have been quite the
task.
Undertaking for that.
Did you guys drive?
I don't even know. I don't remember driving. We must have flown.
But even still, yeah.
Even still, yeah. So my mom was, she moved here to the U.S. from Bolivia, so she had an adventurous spirit.
Yeah.
And then my dad growing up he was born in Switzerland. We traveled to both Bolivia and Switzerland growing up, and then traveled all over the United States, all the way to Grand Canyon and California and Maine, and just covered all kinds of.
That's great. Now, do you still travel? Like yourself? Okay.
I think they must have. I definitely got
given that
bitten
to
by
you.
the travel bug early.
I'm like, I need that. I know. I'm like, I feel like I haven't been anywhere. But so let's talk a little bit about you, and you were when you were diagnosed and what that has brought on.
So my mom passed away in 2006, and I was always told that Parkinson's is not a genetic disease. So even though there was always this little, bit of doubt in the back of my mind, I was like, phew, okay, at least I don't have to worry about that. But then come 2013, 2014 timeframe, I start noticing some things that just don't add up, with my health. I start to notice like a twitching in my leg that I kind of explain away with, it must be, just I'm overexerting myself at the gym. I had taught some classes at the gym. So that wasn't quite adding up. I took some magnesium supplements, and the twitching kind of went away. I also started losing my smell.
Oh, did you?
I did. That was probably one of the strangest symptoms. And even back then, I don't think there was a very strong link between Parkinson's and smell.
So you still don't have it?
So it kind of comes and goes. Depends on, I'd say, my stress level.
Oh.
Interesting.
Yeah, but back then it just it went from like I used to have super smell. My husband used to say like I could smell him from a mile away. It just changed. And I went to the doctor about it, and he, sent me to a specialist, an ENT specialist, and they looked at up my nose, everything, and they said, "You're normal." And I was like, "Well, why can't I smell though?" I just didn't understand it.
Yeah.
Um, I was also going through a pretty stressful time. My husband is active duty military, and he was about to go away for training for 2 months. And that left me with moving our household and pets and kids all by myself, which I was not looking forward to. So there was definitely a little bit of stress
Yeah.
in
A little
life that
bit.
wasn't there previously.
Yeah.
So once we moved, this was our the last move that we did, but moved here to Florida, and my body just kind of crashed when we moved here.
Oh.
So kind of took some time for myself, gave my body the rest that it needed, and kind of worked on stress management, and went to see a functional medicine doctor who kind of got some of my hormones in check. And I felt great after a year. So great that I started working, which I thought was, I had taken 7 years off from engineering, and I was super excited to be in an area where I could kind of restart my career and get a job,
Yeah.
which as a military spouse is not always, you're not always moving to places where there's a ton of jobs. So
Yeah.
I was excited about that. And then everything seemed to be going well for a few years. And then I injured my shoulder at the gym working out, lifting weights. And it was one of those injuries that just kind of was a little relentless. It just wouldn't heal. So I went through a round of physical therapy that never really helped out. So I gave up on that. Went to a workout class a few months later, and I realized I couldn't do a side plank on that arm. Yeah, it just was so weak. And so I decided to go back for another round of physical therapy. And during that time frame, I was working and typing on my computer, and realized that all of a sudden typing with my left hand just was so hard. It's like I had to really concentrate on moving each individual finger and tying my shoes to go to the gym in the morning. I was like, why is this so hard?
Yeah.
I learned how to do this, as a kid, and why am I really having to concentrate? And then I noticed when I would go for runs that I was having to concentrate on my arm swing, which is something that I've never had to think about before. And it started worrying me. At the same time, my husband was, we ended up finding out that he was going to deploy for a year to Afghanistan. And that was,
Wow.
yeah, really, really stressful for us. So we found out in January of 2019 that he was going to deploy for a year starting in late April. And the stress of that news I developed some tremors. And that's when I remember looking down at my hand one day, and I saw my mom's hand.
Yeah.
And I was like, it all makes sense now. I know what this is.
So any of the other symptoms that you had before then, did you, again, because you were a kid, growing up, did you notice or not notice your mom having those symptoms, or did you were you piecing it together?
I didn't really talk to her about it. And, there's so many things I wish I could have asked.
Yeah.
I mean, so many things that you wish you could have asked your mom, after she's gone. But,
Yeah.
and my dad wasn't necessarily he didn't communicate all of these things to us. And so the lens that he saw everything through was a little different than I think my grandmother, who cared for my mom, saw things through. And so I also thought about this. English was my mom's second language. So communicating all of her symptoms, I can only imagine was so much more difficult.
Wow.
Even to doctors, if you could just imagine, I mean, it's hard enough to describe things in English when it's your first language.
Or for her to understand what they are saying to her. Because I don't even understand some of the things that they say to me. I'm like, I'm looking stuff up. So I can't imagine what it was like for her listening to bradykinesia, dyskinesia, dystonia, like.
Right. There's this whole new vocabulary that you have to learn almost. Right. Yeah. So I don't remember. I don't know if she had loss of smell. As a kid, I did notice, her rigidity, which is something that I've always had. And I just thought it was because I worked out, my shoulders are always tight and certain muscles would always kind of cramp up. But I just thought it was because I was active and always working out and lifting weights.
Yeah.
It wasn't until after my diagnosis that I kind of said, well, maybe there was something else to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we know that there's a whole long list of genes that, people could get tested for. And there's many ways in which they can do that, including the 23andMe, PD generation. I think talking to a genetic specialist is definitely important if anybody out there is going to do that. But aside from the genetics of it, whether you have it or not, I think you have a very interesting perspective. You grew up with your mom having it, and so you saw what she did. There were good things that she did. She didn't stop living. You guys continued to travel. And, she was active from her standpoint, but now there's even more things that we've learned. So how do you take that into account of what you saw and how you're living your life now with Parkinson's?
So, I've definitely had a lot of time to reflect on her life with the disease, especially after I was diagnosed. The first thing that my MDS told me about was the benefits of exercise. So looking back at my mom and kind of her general lack of exercise, my dad was the runner, it wasn't, I got my exercise. He still runs to this day. He's in his 70s.
Oh, wow. Good for him.
Just incredible. I mean, he's like the man that won't stop. But she would just stand on the sidelines, watch a race or stay home. And, my grandmother would stay with her. And so I saw that exercise as one way that I could really kind of change the course of my disease and my life with the disease. And I think it's great that I did have that foundation of exercise. My dad got me into running when I was a teenager. So I did have that baseline, exercise background and I really enjoyed it and loved it. So that's one way that I'm combating the disease.
And then what about nutrition? You talk about that a lot. I mean, when I first met you, I was like, I knew you were a healthy individual, but like, man, like you might be short, but you are mighty, and it has to do with your strength of exercising. But you also eat, like I hate when I'm like sitting around, I'm like eating hamburger, and she's like a salad. But you eat very well too, and that's good. Like we're supposed to have a healthy, nutritious diet for various reasons of inflammation, right? Gut health.
Yeah, absolutely. So my mom did, through her course of disease, did consult with some nutritionists. And so I do remember as a child having someone come into our house and like pretty much take everything that I wanted to eat and threw it in the garbage. And my mom was like, "This is for my health." I was like, okay. So I fought it back then, but I think she kind of laid the groundwork for my interest in like healthy eating, and maybe I wasn't the best in my 20s when I was out on my own, but the seed was planted for sure. And then living in a few different places, I lived in just south of Los Angeles when I was in my mid 20s, and just having access to like all the fresh food that's grown there really got me into kind of some more organic, vegetables and things like that. And it's been a journey through the years, just kind of refining our diet. And it's interesting when you see pictures of my husband and me from our early 20s to now we're in our mid 40s, and we look better now than we did in our early 20s.
Good.
And just my husband got his blood panels done the other day, and just the doctors are always like, what do you eat? Because you have the body of a 20-year-old.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Man,
and
Derek would love that.
Same with me, on the inside, on paper, I look like a 20-year-old.
Yeah.
It's just my body. I'm fighting this disease.
Yeah.
So.
Well,
But you're
fighting,
doing a great job.
You're fighting it tooth and nail. And the other thing the last thing I wanted to mention that I think is really important, and not that it gets overlooked, I think, by people in our community, but I feel like it's not as widely discussed just yet, is the aspect of community or socializing. And it's not just having that with, your immediate family or like really close friends, but a circle of people that are like-minded. They're like you and what you're dealing with. And you talked about before how you guys moved and your mom didn't have that access, right? Of a community.
When we lived in New York, there were several family members, a sister of hers, several nieces and nephews that ended up moving from Bolivia to live with us not with us, but nearby.
Yeah.
So we would have family get-togethers. If anybody knows the Hispanic community, we're huge on family, and Sunday afternoons were like just open house at our house. Just come on over, watch soccer.
Yeah.
Football.
Yeah.
Watch soccer and just eat. Hang out.
And eat, yeah.
Eat a good soup or, whatever the Bolivian food of the day was going to be. So we had that. And then I think it was 1990. So I was 10 or 11 when my dad's company moved from New York to North Carolina, and we were going to be moving with. And so our whole family picked up and moved to North Carolina, and my mom had all of a sudden went from having family, and not just friends, but family, and then moved somewhere where she knew nobody. Talk about just being uprooted from your community. So I look back on that now and think that her disease trajectory really changed when we moved. So reflecting on that for my life, there's only so much that I have control of with having a husband in the military, but we do have lots of friends in this area, and so I've really connected with them. But then Jessica, when I saw a video on Instagram of you talking, just being very vulnerable and talking about your the reason why you fundraise for the Michael J. Fox Foundation, I knew like I need to reach out to her because she is just like me. We have very similar stories, and that was the one thing that was really missing. I don't have a community where I live of Parkinson's patients, let alone, young onset.
Yeah.
I was really searching for that. And so I reached out to you, and I just feel so blessed to have found the little group that we found, because you guys get it, we text back and forth just like, oh, hey, I have this going on, this and this. And so I finally feel like I have, community, and Melissa, working out with you guys online, even that, just having a group workout that with people that understand what you're going through. You're like, oh, my meds aren't working quite well. I'm a little slow this morning, or, you understand the ins and outs of this disease. So that has been just an amazing game changer in my life.
But I think, and I might cry for the second time in 1 week. But it is amazing to see how one individual can change their life, because it's not anybody who, came knocking on your door to say, this is what you need to do, or this is what you need to join. Again, like I just put myself out there, but you reached out. Mm-hmm. And so it's because of you that we started this, little group of young onset women, and it's grown to now 16 people, but it's going to continue to grow. I think the idea of what we started, and I know there's little groups like this all over, and I think that's awesome. And we don't have to all be in the same group. Everybody is,
right?
Yeah, it's like everybody thinks differently. We're all a certain age. We all have kids. We're all working or recently retired, and it's like that makes sense for us. And so, like, my biggest push is always telling people, like, just like when you played sports, you're doing it because it's something you love, but then these other people love it, and then they become your friends. And like a sorority, I don't know, I hate to compare it to that, but it's like it is like that camaraderie, and like you said, we get to help each other. And I feel that with your mom, and like even my parents' generation, that's not something that they were necessarily, I feel like it wasn't normal or taught for them to do, of talking about things that you're dealing with. Mm-hmm. It's almost like shy away from it, hide it, because you don't need that to be anybody else's problem. But it's like, actually, it's like a lot of people's problem,
Right, very hush hush, and that's part of the reason why I talk about it, because it shouldn't be hush hush. This is something very difficult that we're all dealing with. Mm-hmm. And if we don't reach out to other people that are going through the same thing, I mean, it's not going to end well. We need that community.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Oh, it's so amazing talking to you. I just have such respect for you and what you have seen in your past and what you're making it of your future. And, again, just those key things of exercise, nutrition, community, but then also, I mean, even family. Like, if your mom wasn't open about it with you and you never knew, or, how much would you have been able to accept or grow from what you've been able to do now? It's like, just, I think you mentioned it before. It's like PD is not, it doesn't affect just you, right? Like you talked about, it affects your family, and it affects, generations of family. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, that's my big takeaway, is that, PD really affects more than just the individual. We've heard it affects families, but in my case, I mean, it can affect generations, which the word just needs to get out there. And my biggest advice is, if you are, curious if there is a potential link, to talk to a genetic counselor, because they can walk you through what your individual risk is for a genetic link to PD, and they can counsel you through that and just talk you through some of the decisions, whether to go forth with genetic testing like I did.
I think that's a really good way to close this out, because that's one thing that you told me. I was going to do the PD generation, and I probably still should have, because I didn't realize what you sign up for is just to understand the gene, and they don't have to tell you what it is, but I would like to do it just for the research and data of everybody to learn more. But when you said, you're like, do you understand the implications of when you do genetic testing of anything, what you learn, it's probably just like a diagnosis. Like when you're diagnosed, like you don't think it's going to hit you that hard, and then it actually happens. So having a genetic counselor, I think, is really, really key if anybody is looking into doing this.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is key.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. It was just a pleasure talking to you, as always, and I'm sure we'll be talking or texting later. So
keep inspiring.
Yes, and you can continue to even start growing your own community down there, which I'm sure you will have no problem doing. Mm-hmm. But thank you again for coming. In our last 30 seconds, I just want to wrap it up and leave everybody with this. Parkinson's can affect so many individuals, whether you're carrying a gene or you're not, and it's just you have symptoms because of the environment around you, or we just don't know why yet we have it. But, keeping track of your different symptoms, being open with your family and your friends, and talking about things, finding a community, exercising, eating right, And if you do get tested for genetic testing, make sure that you consult somebody who can help you with that whole process. So at the end of the day, thank you so much, and we'll see you guys all next time. Thanks for tuning in.